Welcome to the Christopher Hole Training Podcast, where we're going to be talking about social media myths about low back pain and core training. Today we're only going to cover two about back pain, one about core training, so let's get stuck into it. Myth number one comes from the idea, and you hear about this on social media. It's not just about back pain, but low to middle income farmers or manual workers seem to be better off than the people in the West that sit at desks all day. So you will hear, and I'm going to go through a quote about what someone said about this, but they seem to think that because they are working manually out in the fields, tending to the land, that they seem to be sort of better off with regards to musculoskeletal pain or low back pain than people that sit at desks for 8 hours. So the quote that this comes from, there was a study done of women who carry huge loads on their back, and they looked at whether it was detrimental to their spine, and it wasn't. The spine is designed to be loaded. They had stronger necks. So the first part of this, which we kind of need to make clear, but I've got some sort of studies on my computer here, is are they holding the weight on their back or are they holding it on their head like they do in those countries? Again, it's perceived because they're being manual all day that they are better off than people that sit at desks and that are static all day. If you look at Asian countries and the paddy fields, how do they lift? ? They stand with their legs straight, fully flexed, and in Africa, they don't have ergonomic advice. So we're talking about African women, we're talking about African farmers, we're talking about people that work in paddy fields in Asia and how they stand. So you may have seen this, they will literally just be forward folded at the hips with straight legs, and they'll be picking at whatever they're picking at the floor. So this person was suggesting that because they do this, they don't have any sort of musculoskeletal problems, or to be probably better off, they don't have the problems that we have in the West because we sit all day. So I'm going to go to the first study, and this was the impact of heavy load carrying on musculoskeletal pain and disability among women in Shinyanga, I hope I've pronounced that right, region in Tanzania. So it's a study. Now these aren't sort of controlled studies. These are looking at the information that has been collected. So findings indicate a substantial burden of musculoskeletal damage and disability in this population of women who carry heavy loads daily. The extent of discomfort and disability increased with the increasing exposure to various load-carrying measures, especially for low back pain. Larger epidemiologic studies that definitively assess relationships of load carrying with musculoskeletal disorders and disabilities are warranted. So that's them basically saying we need to do more of this. But on the initial level, what's found is that they are sort of exposed to back pain. Because of their lifting, because of their carrying, they do get back pain. And the more they do, the more back pain they get, or the more discomfort they feel. So again, we have to come to the understanding that too much sitting is a problem. That I will say, it's not that we're better off over here. It's just the assumption that these active populations are better off. So if you do too much and if you do too little, you kind of get the same problem. So we need to find that sort of middle ground. Right, the second study is, again, it's another meta-analysis of 64 studies with 68,684 participants across 23 countries. And it says, Narrative synthesis found associations between musculoskeletal disorders, particularly activities including heavy lifting and repetitive movement. So again, we're talking about heavy lifting can be a problem. A lot of people talk about when it comes to lower back pain that we need to continue lifting, we need to continue doing these movements. But what's being found that the people that do a lot of them are getting the same problems. So it's not that they're going from one end of the spectrum to the other. It's not that they're sitting down all day and then they go and do a load of heavy lifting in the gym. These people that are doing lifting of quite possibly sort of moderate loads, they are getting the problem as well. So musculoskeletal disorders are common in agricultural workers in low to middle income countries. Global prevalence of low back pain in farmers, particularly in Africa, is greater than previously reported. Global prevalence in the general population. So there's more of it out there than was understood before. So this is the understanding that we need to come to. These people aren't necessarily better off. They do experience back pain, and in some respects, they're kind of experiencing it the same problem, but possibly for different reasons because they're at the other end of the spectrum. This may be attributed to environmental factors and high-risk activities, which could be targeted for prevention and early intervention strategies to support individuals, prevent disability and reduce loss of productivity. So again, I repeat myself, broken record. Lifting isn't the saviour for lower back pain. Lifting can be as much of a problem for lower back pain as it is a cure. We do need to lift, and we should lift, but we have to understand how to do it, when to do it, and I'll talk a little bit more. I'll be able to link myth 1 and 2 together a little bit when I talk about that. But I just want to cover this off because I've got one more study to go through, which is the prevalence and associated risk factors of low back pain among users of primary healthcare clinics serving semi-urban and rural settlements in, and again, I'm possibly going to butcher this name, in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. So again, this was only done on 14 participants. It was a questionnaire that was done. So again, it's not a huge study, but again, it's just another common theme. So we've had first of all a small study, then quite a big study across 23 countries with nearly 70,000 people, and now we're back to a much smaller study. But essentially, in this setting where the prevalence of low back pain was high, so again, the quote that I spoke about earlier when he was saying it wasn't high, they're fine, they're bending from the hips, bending the spine, they're fine in the paddy fields, and farmers, they're not. In the setting where prevalence of low back pain was high, specialised treatments for low back pain were not available in the primary healthcare facility. Incorporation of such treatments will be useful for people in lower socioeconomic strata to overcome the burden of lower back pain. So it is a myth that these people that are active all day, they are tending to the land, they are farming, they are walking, they are lifting, they are carrying. It is perceived by the West that these people are, or by therapists in the West, that these people are fine and this is the type of lifestyle that we should be pursuing. Unfortunately, as we've just heard, this is incorrect. What we need to be able to do is not be too active, not be too sedentary. We need to find an optimal range in the middle. If we do become more active, we need to be able to recover properly to be able to go back to activity. If we overcook our lower back, if we overcook our spine with too much movement, too much static posture, then we're going to get a problem. Those need to be balanced. If you are in the position of lower back pain, then we need to get out, not only using exercise, but also using everyday activities to desensitize the pain. That is the most important part of any lower back pain method, if you will. And that is to desensitize the problem by not doing the problem. If the problem is created by lifting, we need to modify the lift, not only the position that you go into, it may be the load that you're carrying, it may be the position that you're carrying it. There are, again, a million and one ways which I could go on about, which I'm not going to because that could take all day. But essentially, what I wanted to get across is that people in lower socioeconomic countries that are active all day aren't in a better position to people that sit all day. So don't sort of blame lifestyle as, or a particular lifestyle as the problem, and this particular lifestyle is the solution, because as a general rule, it's probably not. So we need to think about it in an even different way to that. So myth number one is that people in lower socioeconomical environments aren't better off because of their active lifestyle where they tend the land. They're in the exact same place. Myth number two is bracing is bad for my spine, or bracing is bad for the spine. So we need to not brace. We need to not sort of hold our body tense. Now, I'm going to say that's a myth because it depends on the brace and it depends on the activity that you are about to do. So a brace, an abdominal brace, is not where you 100% tense your torso and then sort of you can barely breathe and you can't really move and you're sort of stuck in a position. That's one type of brace. That is a very heavy brace. Another type of brace is a very mild brace, and it depends on when we would use it. Now, there is some truth in that example of bracing is bad for the spine. And that would be if you are holding it 24/7 and you're holding it in that position and you can't move and it's, you can't breathe and I'm rigid and I move like a robot. If you were doing that throughout everyday life, then it's a problem. Then I would agree it is a problem. If you have come across that understanding of I shouldn't brace, and then you need to lift a heavy box off the floor, then that piece of understanding may be a problem. Because in that scenario, the brace is useful. If it's a heavy object that you need to get right down, brace, and then lift, then it's useful. As long as you still have use for the hips, use for the knees. So you bend at the hips, you bend at the you bend at the knees, and you are able to lift. Then that heavy brace is useful. Another type of brace is a light brace. So again, if you were to see a pencil on the floor that you wanted to pick up, and you used a heavy brace to go and pick it up, so you had to breathe, right, can't breathe, got to pick the pen up, and then you went down to pick it up, again, in that scenario, it would be a problem. If you had to do it because your back is so sensitive, again, it's a problem, but because you are having to do that. So your back is in such a state that you are having to do that. Now, to pick up a pen normally, people don't need to have a heavy brace like that. To pick up a pen, it may just be a light brace. Now, why do we light brace? Well, first of all, why do we brace to start with? If you can imagine, you've got, let's just say S1 at the bottom, L5, L4, L3, L2, L1, and then you've got T12 in the rib cage. Basically, those 5 vertebrae don't have any support. So they, like the sacrum has the pelvis as a way of supporting itself, albeit they are fused vertebra, but they have the pelvis as a means of support. If you go to the thoracic spine, they also have the rib cage, so a bony support system. The lumbar spine doesn't have a bony support system, so it needs the muscles to support the vertebra. So when you abdominally brace and you contract the abdominal wall with the rectus abdominis and the obliques at the side, what you're essentially doing is you're taking a guy rope from L1, L2, L3, L4 and L5 and fixing it down one onto the rib cage, but also from the obliques around. So you're basically holding those vertebrae in place and stabilizing the spine. So it doesn't, not that it's going to wobble all over the place like I'm doing, but as a basic understanding, it's there to stabilize the spine. So in a heavy lift, when there's more chance of it being irritated or there's greater instability, then you use that heavier brace to hold it in place. The closer you are to the episode of back pain, the more of a brace that you would use. If you are picking a pen up from the floor, it's probably useful just to lightly brace, go down, pick the pen up off the floor and come back up. Because all you're doing, you're just stabilising the vertebrae in place and then giving it a base of support. So it doesn't, you can get little micro movements in it. Again, I'm exaggerating how much the movement is, but you can get micro movements that can create spasms. So that can create problems. So we need to start thinking about the brace as a useful thing for the spine. In some respects, the body will make you do it. If you've ever had a back spasm, you will notice that in the initial part of the back spasm, you will find yourself holding yourself. That is the body unconsciously making you hold the body. So in that regard, the body's doing it at an unconscious level. As the body starts relaxing, there is a time and a place to use a light brace. There is a time and a place to use a heavy brace. There is also a time and a place not to use a heavy brace, i.e. when you're moving around everyday life in general, or when you're picking a pen up from the floor. There is also a time when it's not that useful to use a light brace, when you're picking a heavy thing off the floor. So you need to kind of be able to put the brace into perspective. So by just saying holding a brace or holding yourself rigid is bad for your spine, in some scenarios is correct, but in other scenarios is incorrect. And again, it's coming to that understanding that we have to know when to use the brace, where to use the brace, how to use the brace, and why we're using the brace. So again, it's not as simple as someone just coming along and saying, don't brace, you need to move, you need to bend your spine, you need to do this, you need to do that. There is a use for the brace. You just got to know when to use it, how to use it, and why you're using it. The third and final myth is that, this is more to do with core training, and it's the QL, or the quadratus lumborum, and the obliques are rotational power muscles. So they are there to develop rotational power. The QL and the obliques are not there to develop rotational power. The muscles of your core are designed to prevent movement. That is why the fibers go in different directions. If you look at external obliques and internal obliques, they kind of go against each other. It's like a mesh. And then you've got rectus abdominis going up and down. And then you've got QL, again, coming diagonally down. So you've got all these different muscles. They are stabilizing muscles. What creates rotational power is the hip or the shoulder. So when you throw, essentially you throw from the hip. So you rotate the hip, then you tense the abdominals, and then the arm and the hand follow through, and the ball leaves the hand and you throw. Same with a punch, same with a golf swing, same with a kick. So we have to be able to rotate from the hip. So it's more important to rotate from the hip than it is to rotate from the spine. The spine can rotate, but it needs to be done in a specific way. So let's look at a lift as an example. So a lift, which would be high strength, so a heavy lift. So you would lift a heavy weight and you would do it slowly. The best muscles for that are the hip muscles. Strongest, biggest, most powerful muscles in the body. So you would go down, maintain neutral posture, grab onto the bar, you would stand up straight. You would push the hips forward and you would stand up straight. So all of that is coming from the hips. The spine is there to be in that position, and then as you come up, it stays taut in position and you come up. If you bend at the spine whilst you're doing that, that's called an energy leak. So you get the force produced gets leaked out, and it doesn't translate or transmit all the way up the body, down the arms and into the bar. If we take a movement sort of at the other end of the spectrum, which is low weight but very fast, i.e. a golf swing, which again, lots of rotation is needed in that. All of that comes from the hips. It doesn't come from the QL, and it doesn't come from the obliques. What happens there is when you get up to the top of the movement, yes, the spine is rotated, but what happens is when you go through that initial movement, there is a contraction of the core. So as you go to whip the hips through, there is a contraction of the core. What then happens as the club comes down, there is a very mild relaxation of the muscle. As you hit the ball, there is again another, let's just say, mild spike of the core muscles, again to stabilize the spine as the power comes through the hip. So at those two moments, that is where you need to translate the power into the swing and onto the ball. So there are two very mild contractions to be able to do that. So again, when we're talking about rotational power, we've got to talk about the hips and we've got to talk about the shoulders, because it's the shoulders which have the pecs and the lats around it. Again, two very strong, powerful muscles. And it's the hips that have the glutes around them. And just in some respects, when we're talking about lifting, the quads will be involved as well. Very sort of big, powerful muscles to be able to lift weight off the floor. So in both scenarios, the movement is initiated at the hips. Yes, the spine can bend with a golf swing or with a throw or with a punch, but when the impact happens, contraction. When the movement is initiated, contraction. So we need to understand movement slightly differently. It's not rotation from the spine. If we get rotation from the spine, we are at greater risk of injury, and we are also decreasing our performance. For the very simple reason, they aren't very powerful muscles. Glutes versus obliques, you're going to get lots more from the glutes. Glutes versus QL, you're going to get lots more from the QL. So we need to understand it in that fashion. Rather than increasing risk of injury and decreasing performance with lots of spine power, we need to start thinking about hip power and use the spine accordingly, and to muscle pulse or contract and relax accordingly as well to go with that. So myth number 3 is that the obliques and QL are sort of there to develop rotational power. They are not. They are there to stabilize, and they are there to transfer power through the core from bottom to top or from top to bottom. If you get the pulse wrong, or if you get a bend in the spine, that is known as an energy leak.